What do the Jazz look like next season if there are no big moves made in the offseason? What does internal growth look like for the Jazz? Find out next on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin, excited to be back with you again, filling in for David Locke. And it's almost Combine week, so I'm super excited to be there with you guys. And you guys know me by now, but I'm a credentialed NBA draft analyst for Locked On NBA Big Board, attendee of the 2023 NBA Draft Combine, soon to be attendee of the 2024 Combine, broadcast assistant for the Jazz the past 3 seasons, statistician for the Jazz the past 3 seasons, and a diehard hoops fan, both collegiate and NBA. So I'm getting you prepared in the NBA and college mindset to best prepare you for a critical juncture in Jazz history as the Jazz look to rebuild, and it looks like they're planning to rebuild. So thank you guys for making Locked On Jazz your first listen every day. And remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is comment anything below. And today's question is, how many points per game will Taylor Hendricks average next year? That's something we're going to discuss later on in the episode. All right, today's title sponsor is Prize Picks, so make sure you guys download Prize Picks and play and hopefully win some money as the playoffs carry on. Or if you're into baseball like I am, make sure to check out the baseball options. All right, in the first segment, I'll talk about what the Jazz will look like as a team. What will they look like if they don't make big deals? We talked about earlier this week the big deals that are possible. Well, what if they don't make one of those big deals and they carry on as is, maybe shed some salary, different players there? And plus, how will Lauri fare next year? And also we'll address his likely extension that he probably signs this offseason, what the money could look like. In the second segment, I'll outline the growth areas for the Jazz youngsters, what Keyonte, George, and Taylor Hendricks, those players should aspire to become, compare them to players that they admire and that they are looking to emulate. And I'll look at the stats of those players that they're trying to emulate and see, okay, well, what's feasible if you're following the career trajectory. And I've picked out 2 examples for each player that I think that they could emulate, and it's feasible. And then also, what does that mean for the Jazz should they hit those goals? So that's the second segment. And in the final segment, I'll ask you guys a question that I thought of. Why can't the Jazz be like the Pacers, who are not a true contender in my estimation, but are battling in the second round? And I'll explain how it can occur, and is it actually something the Jazz want to do? All right, so let's dive right in. Well, the Jazz's first order of operations, in my opinion, is finding a way to pay Lauri Markkanen well, but not overpay to compromise the team in the future due to the collective bargaining agreement making the contracts of very good players need to be more team friendly than maybe years past, where you could kind of super team your way into winning, and you always wanted to pay frugally but fairly. I think it's even more of the utmost important now. We talked about that in a few episodes ago about how the Nuggets have their starters paid a lot, but you need to have guys on rookie contracts to play well if you're going to pay that way. So you got to make a good deal for Markkanen. And if Lauri's not the true star of the team, like we've talked about as a possibility, there needs to be some money left over to pay the star accordingly or fill the roster smartly if you're going to take that star in the draft like you'd hope to. Like Anthony Edwards, the Wolves are going to pay handsomely, but they needed some really good players to pay around that guy in a rookie deal who you can tell is the star of your franchise. Like Wembanyama, the Spurs could try to go all in, honestly, if they wanted to, and say, Wembanyama is our future. Why don't we pay a ton while he's on a rookie deal? And I wouldn't be opposed to that if I'm the Spurs. I think it would be, I doubt it happens, but that's just the thought that crossed my mind. Before we get to Lauri's contract, let's discuss money. The Jazz will let THT and Kira Lewis Jr. go, and I would imagine they'll look to trade John Collins and see if a team can absorb some of his $25 million contract opening, which already opens up about $30 million of guaranteed money. The Jazz have a lot of money to spend, so I don't think this is going to be like, oh, we don't have enough to pay Markkanen. Now back to Markkanen. I believe they will use the money opened up plus the money they already have to extend Lauri before he becomes a free agent and the bidding war goes up. My money expectations would be that Lauri will be paid somewhere in the avenues of the high 30s per year, meaning $35 to $37 million per year. Per KSL Sports, With his contract set to expire in the summer of 2025, the Jazz can offer Markkanen a 4-year extension on his current deal worth upwards of $160 million. That's 160. So we're somewhere in the same avenue, and that's just what the Jazz have the feasibility to offer. And maybe it is 40, and that's not terrible. It's a lot of money, but you got to fill the roster and pay the guys right now. If the Jazz don't make one of those trades, and they do lose expensive players such as THT, maybe a John Collins, maybe a Jordan Clarkson gets dealt, then you got to fill it. And I think that's a way to fill it and keep him satisfied. And then this is a quote I found when I was researching this. When asked about his extension shortly after the trade deadline, after selling Kelly Olynyk, Ochai Agbaji, and Simone Fontecchio, Lauri stated simply, "So they're doing the best they can towards that. I think we have a lot of good people in this organization. They'll have shown that they have shown that they can do the job, so I'll have to trust those guys." So Lauri seems content, thinks he's going to get paid, likely will get paid, and he's likely still a Jazzman. Now let's study Lauri's game and present some expectations for the finisher on the Utah Jazz for the 2024-2025 season. So you got to pick a direction more clearly this season than the Jazz have the past 2 seasons, where the Jazz started 10-3 2 seasons ago, were the best record in the league, and then ended up with the 9th pick. Well, this year, the Jazz were 500 through 50 games. So the remaining 32 games, the Jazz were not good whatsoever. Probably the worst team in the NBA. I mean, statistically they were, and record-wise they were just about on that. So the Jazz, I think, ended up in purgatory, relatively speaking. Yes, they were able to get that top 10 pick last year. This year, it seems likely, as there's only a 0.4% chance that the Jazz do not have a top 10 pick. There's a 26% chance the Jazz get a top 4, but it's playing too it's a dangerous game. The proposition the Jazz were playing is like playing a deal with the devil, in that the Jazz made it hard for themselves to get that franchise-altering talent both seasons by not having a firm direction of which way to go. I also think that the West will be very good next year, maybe even better with the emergence of Wembanyama, and there are a lot of young teams that are only going to ascend. So that makes it easier to be bad, and that's where I think the Jazz go. But I think they can develop without sacrificing the season by intentionally playing worse lineups like they did at the end of the year. They weren't trying to win as hard as they were trying early in the year, but I think that can be beneficial for the Jazz, as they'll be trying to win. They just won't have the talent necessary to do so, and that could maybe develop Lauri Markkanen among others. So back to Lauri. I expect Lauri to have more and more opportunities to improve the individual creation aspect of his game that I think is the lone piece missing from his game to reach a higher level on the level of stardom. Like on his ascension, the next step is creating more off the bounce by himself. I know he's 7 feet tall. It's not exactly the easiest thing, but he's going to have to find a way if he wants to elevate a few more rungs up that ladder. The Jazz used to get like him a lot of catch and shoot threes. Mike Conley was instrumental in that. Then the Jazz last year tried to get Lauri touches in the mid post to use his superior size and impressive touch to score out of isolation, and there were mixed results. But because of the concerted effort to get him the ball there last season, if the Jazz are 2 feet in on being a rebuilding season, as opposed to 1 foot in, 1 foot out, I expect Lauri to be extremely intentional on working on supposed weaknesses this offseason entering next season, and he'll get more post-ups, a la what we saw with the Jazz doing with Bojan Bogdanovic, or more mid-post ISOs. And I think that effort will pay long-term dividends, if not short-term, to make him more of a matchup night where the Jazz are ready to win. My statistical expectations for Lauri are similar to last year, where he averaged 23, 8, 2 on 48, 40, and 90 splits of 48 from the field, 40 from 3, 90 from the free throw line. So I assume this year these are my expectations, so who knows. I will assume Lauri scores about 24.5 points per game, 10 rebounds, because I think he takes a leap there, because I think there's a world in which Collins could be gone and he's not on the team. And I also think his field goal percentage may drop due to more isolation, but I think his three-point percentage will hover around 40 and free throw should be around 90 once more. Defensively, here's another thing. I want to see if Lauri guards the 5 in the second unit, serving as the backup 5, as Kelly Olynyk kind of vacated that. I also think Kessler will start this year, and he was kind of pushed down the ladder as he and Collins didn't overlap very well. If Collins isn't there, Kessler starts. I could see Lauri Markkanen playing the 5 in the second unit. And I actually think that's really something I want to have happen. Lauri Markkanen can punish the second unit's 5s to further the Jazz's long-term goals of maximizing Lauri's incredible blend of size, fluidity, and shooting. And I believe those 6 minutes or so at the 5 could help the Jazz now and down the road and give the Jazz a unique look that they can exploit the other team for not having. Alrighty, it's more statistical prediction time around the corner, so that will be Keyonte, Taylor Hendricks. What do they look like there in their year twos? And who are guys that they resemble in terms of build physically and in terms of the production. Find out next. But first, let me tell you about Prize Picks. In case you didn't know, let me tell you all about what Prize Picks is. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into 1,000 with basketball, hockey, and college baseball entries today on Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Prize Picks has something for every sports fan, from basketball and hockey to League of Legends and everything in between. You can pick Anthony Edwards, Caitlin Clark, Connor McDavid, and Jude Bellingham, all available on the exact same entry. Those are 4 different sports, 4 different athletes, all available on the same entry, and you can win all the same. I've played Prize Picks before, but since I work for the NBA, can't bet on the NBA. But I've dabbled in baseball and even in tennis. And my favorite is trying to pinpoint pitchers who I think will exceed the total of strikeouts. And then in tennis, I like to find the big servers and try to predict if they'll exceed or be below the total of aces that they hit in any given match, especially for the Grand Slams and Wimbledon, the fast surfaces. I love tennis. That's what I like to try to pinpoint and see if I can win on those. And I'll be doing that again this summer as it gets going. So just download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That's Locked On NBA, and you'll get a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Also, passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your #1 ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only. Available to U.S. customers. All righty, welcome back. By the way, I have a question for you guys. Are you guys watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day long, and then you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Well, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, everydayers, you guys may remember last summer I did a podcast discussing Keyonte George and how I believed a lot in his development. And I told you guys a story about the first time I saw him play in the Pro-Am games where he was playing for Baylor, but a kind of toned down version, a depleted version of Baylor against he was playing for Team USA, which is essentially Baylor at the time, playing against Italy and Canada's U23 teams. And I could not unsee Jamal Murray before he played for Baylor in the regular season because he scored off step backs, he scored off of floaters and finishes with impressive coordination, things that are very rare. And while he was more of a scorer, there was playmaking. And like I said, I think he's a better scorer than he is a playmaker, but I'll take that. That they can distribute, but they have that unique ability to score that's just you don't see at that young of an age that can be cultivated and produced into being a combo guard. So far, that's largely been proven too, which is why the future at point guard for Keyonte, there are questions about it. There are skeptics, but I actually believe that I thought Keontae's pick and roll navigation impressed me. I thought that the rate with which he improved as a passer encouraged me greatly. And that's why I still think this is very possible. Now, is he an all-time distributor? No. Maybe the Jazz want a guy who takes some pressure out and put the ball in their hands to distribute, a la what Nikola Jokic does for Jamal Murray. That would be wonderful, but you're not going to get a 3-time MVP most likely. But if they can get someone to share some of the responsibility as a passer, then the Jazz are looking really good. So if you guys remember that episode, I don't know if you do, but that would be pretty impressive if you did. I dug out their careers coming out of high school, where they were rated, how they scored in college, where they were drafted, and said if Keyonte puts up Jamal Murray-like numbers, that would be a great rookie season, because I anticipated he would split time in the starting lineups, may even play some in the G League, split time in the starting lineups like Jamal Murray did. I even thought that Keyonte might spend some time in the G League because it would just be a busy room, and I thought the Jazz might not try to be very good, and it would be a THT and Colin Sexton backcourt. At times, I was right in that THT played some point guard. Chris Dunn played some point guard. Sexton tried his hand, but he mostly was a shooting guard. But Keyonte shed those expectations and blew them out of the water midway through the season, which is what I hoped, and I outlined that as a possibility. At every juncture, though, Jamal Murray, back to that point, was rated higher out of high school, won the Nike Hoop Summit MVP, which has international players and Americans during high school. He scored more at Kentucky than Keyonte did at Baylor, 20 points per game. He was the first freshman to do so under Coach Calipari, and was drafted 7th versus Keyonte 16th. So let's continue to compare the two. And we know how great Jamal Murray has become in the NBA, a near all-star who's better than the non-all-star label would indicate. I think he's a better player than some of the all-stars that are named. He's a champion. He hits big shots. So he's a really good player. It's really encouraging that Keyonte still keeps this a discussion. Okay, so Keyonte, the big things you want to point out, he has to shoot better and less streakily than he did last season. He was terribly inconsistent as a shooter, shot 39 from the field and 33 from three. He had a few months where he shot great from three, north of 40%. He had some where he was sub 30%. That's got to be more steady. Keyonte finished, as it was, though, Keyonte finished second and made threes among rookies, so not all hope is lost by any means there. He finished averaging 13 points per game, 4.4 assists per game, a little under 3 rebounds, and defensively there were glimmers of hope, but like most rookies, he struggled defensively and was picked on defensively. Now, without further ado, Jamal Murray's stats from year 1 and 2 are as follows. 9.9 points per game, 2.6 rebounds per game, 2.1 assists per game, 33% from three, 40 from the field, 88 from the line, while starting only 10 games. Yeah, he finished 5th in the Rookie of the Year. So Keyonte's numbers were better than Murray's by a decent amount. Keyonte played a few more minutes per game and got more opportunities at the end of the season. Keyonte split time with an aging Jameer Nelson at that point. Jamal Murray spent a split time with an aging Jameer Nelson at that point. So, for context, Keyonte played the more minutes, but he has better numbers, and the fact he has better numbers bodes well. You can't say anything other than that. So, Murray's second year looked as follows. 80 games started out of 81, 32 minutes per game, 16.7 points per game, 3.7 rebounds per game, 3.4 assists per game, 45% from the field, 38 from three, and 91 from the line. Big jump. That's a big, big jump. So Keyonte can replicate that. I think there's a chance he scores similarly to Murray as his shooting numbers progress, and he continues to attack the rim, gets more free throws, gets better near the rim, creates more opportunities for his shot by making them respect his drive, and vice versa. The scoring could easily occur, especially if Collins and Clarkson are not on the Jazz, which I alluded to earlier, as possible. I wouldn't say likely, but is possible. And then I expect Keyonte, if you ask my averages, I expect him to score about 16 points per game with 5 assists, and maybe he shoots 43 from the field and 35 from three. So that's basically in the wheelhouse. Jamal Murray, mind you, was about 17 per game, 4 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 45 from the field. So Murray's a little bit of a better shooter in this, about the same from three, maybe 3% better from three. And Keyonte has more assists, and they play similar minutes, maybe Murray 1 point more per game. That seems pretty likely to me. And there's more threes now, so that's part of the reason I think Keyonte, even though his percentages are lower, minutes are about the same, that it's probable he can score about the same amount. Side note to this, the last thing I want to say is I really want to see his assists increase. And I know I said 5 versus 4.4, and you're like, that's not very much. Well, I want to see his assist to turnover improve and his decision-making sharpen. And I think that's really possible because he's put a concerted effort into becoming a better point guard, and he's a basketball junkie. I believe in Keyonte George. Side note, the other common comparison was CJ McCollum. So let's look at his first year, his second year, and the jump that McCollum made. But McCollum was a backup who scored 5 points in his first year, 7 points in year 2. And then in year 3, won most improved player of the year, scoring 21 a game, and then has produced 9 straight years of scoring 20 or more. So those are two comps to Keyonte George that through 1 year of NBA basketball, he's looking favorably compared to those guys. Like, he came out looking good. Now let's go to Taylor Hendricks. Hendricks says he wants to emulate Jaden McDaniels. I cut up that audio while working for the Jazz this year, and he talked about how their body type was similar. So he wanted to watch their film. He was watching McDaniels' film all year long. So I'll compare Hendricks to him. But I think the stats are less of a good indication of Hendricks and the comparison to McDaniels than Impact Felt is. And what I mean by that is McDaniels is a tenacious defender. Hendricks vastly improved as he got in. At the beginning, he barely played for the Jazz, like he was mostly in the Stars. And when he played the minutes, he typically was playing for the Jazz when the Jazz weren't that dead set on winning. They were more dead set on development. So some of his numbers feel a little bit inflated to me. What I mean by that is there wasn't as much leverage in the basketball game as you typically feel. In the final 20 games of the season, he averaged 9.2 points, 5.8 rebounds, and 1.1 assists in those final 20 games of his rookie year. That's pretty good. He finished shooting about 39% from deep, and those numbers to me are ideal for next season, but with more consistent and more meaningful minutes producing those numbers. So they're not garbage time numbers. Not to say that those were all garbage time numbers because he started the vast majority of those games, but I want them to have more meaning than just those games that didn't matter if the Jazz won or lost. So he said because his body type is similar to Jaden McDaniels, he watches McDaniels, and that's all swell. But McDaniels, in my opinion, is the third best defender in the entire NBA, and that's behind Rudy Gobert and Victor Wembanyama. And to start the year, the Jazz said Hendricks would come in and he could impact the floor both ways. Well, really, he came in and the Jazz only played zone. The Jazz played zone when Hendricks was in the game, and that was kind of like, yeah, we know he has traits, but he's not ready to play man-to-man defense. By the end of the year, the Jazz stuck him on Luka, and they stuck him on Booker, and all those type of guys. So there's growth there, but I want to see him become a perimeter defender in mindset, as well as like the stopper in mindset, and be a little less scared to ruffle feathers on the ball, and be more confident that he can stop players with his length as a perimeter defender, as opposed to a secondary rim protector. In McDaniels' first year, to continue this analogy of comparing these guys, he scored 7 a game and averaged a block a game and had nearly 4 boards. Pretty pedestrian. In his second year, he averaged 9.2 points per game, 4.2 rebounds per game, 1.5 stocks, meaning steals and blocks. It was 0.8 and 0.7, 46 from the field and 32 from 3. I want Hendricks to shoot better than that, and I think he will because McDaniels is not a very good shooter, but I want similar point totals. I'd like to see 10 and 6 from Hendricks with good defense on the ball, not just as a secondary rim protector, but someone who can really influence the game while defending one of the better scorers on the other end. That's where his value will skyrocket, much like how Jeremy Grant did so with Denver. He embraced that, and then he became a go-to scorer in Detroit, but I don't think he's regarded as useful of a player in that role. Ideally, Hendricks hits about 38% of his threes, and I think that's a success in both regards for Keyonte and Hendricks if they hit those numbers, and I don't think it's out of the range of possibility. Well, that's seeing what the Jazz youngsters can do in the short term. So what can they do in the long term if they grow? Why can they build similarly to the Indiana Pacers? Find out next, but first, let me tell you about Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying, flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you can work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, and the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. Cool new playing pieces to heist their vaults. Like you can do all these things. You have these cool pieces for new boards. You can fight each other for which one's winning the emoji battle. Even you can taunt each other and smash their buildings, heist their vaults, and taunt them even further by winning the emoji battle. That's the type of warfare you really want to win, is to humiliate your opponent when you win, right? I don't know. By the way, Plus Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day, constantly changing tournaments and challenges, and a ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. Those are pretty cool. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it for free on Monopoly Go or Google Play on the app. Sorry, get Monopoly Go on Google Play or the App Store, and you get your game on. Also, I want to tell you guys about Murdoch Hyundai. I've told you guys numerous times that I've driven a Murdoch Hyundai from the Murray location. They've got them all over the Utah Valley in 3 locations, and they're wonderful. One guy there was like, Leif, is that you from Locked On? Because he saw my card. And I was driving the Tucson. It's got all the bells and whistles up to date. Like you turn on the turn signal and there's someone in your blind spot, it alerts you both auditorily, and a light illuminates on the mirror. They've got that for the Palisade, the Tucson, and the Kona. And they even have the new Ioniq that was the Motor Trend car of the year for the 5. The 6 is even better. Sleek, looks like a Porsche. So get on over to your friends at the nearest Murdoch Hyundai for you guys. And make sure to tell them that we sent you in from Locked On Jazz, because they love to hear that. And they'll make sure to give you the best deal that they can. And they have out their entire stocking online. So if you want to check in and see, what's in inventory right now, they'll have that covered for you. You go in, and then they'll answer all their questions for you at the store. And it's just all the great reason to join and become an owner of a Murdoch Hyundai. All righty, back to Locked On Jazz, final segment. Uh, I would ask you guys a question, and that would be: do the Jazz really want to contend like the Indiana Pacers? And that would be my premising question. But maybe you do. The Jazz are young and have a solid few pieces. With the chance to draft another piece this year, assuming that they don't lose out on that pick, they have 3 draft picks. Um, they have lots of assets down the road, and the Pacers were in a similar spot. Now they're battling and have a puncher's chance against the Knicks, having had chances in both the games at MSG. And Anunoby's out of game 3, and Brunson's banged up, came back from the locker room in game 2. So they have a chance to advance to the Eastern Conference Finals. I still think it's unlikely. Their core is made up of youthful players and shrewd additions of established players. Shrewd for some of them, bold for others. Now, I know what you'll say. Wait a minute. Halliburton, who's their top star, was not drafted by them. I'm well aware. I know he was on the Kings. 2 spins of this would be, nor was Lauri Markkanen drafted by the Utah Jazz. And he's closer to Halliburton than Halliburton is to someone like Anthony Edwards or SGA, who can truly lead a team to the promised land. And the second spin of this would be, okay, if Lowry's not Halliburton, he could be like Sabonis, whom the Pacers traded to acquire Halliburton. And that would be like if the Jazz found a great package to trade Lowry for. I see the first one as more relevant and more important to this process, but I just acknowledge you guys who may be contrarians. So what else do the Pacers have? Young players on low money deals that have grown well this year. Mathurin, he's hurt right now, but he was a top 10 pick. Nemhard was a really good pick who's played well beyond where his draft expectation would be. Obi Toppin and Aaron Nesmith are second chance reclamation projects that have turned out very well. They had talent, but now are being used to the best of their abilities. Miles Turner was a former top 10, he was the 11th pick, a guy who has always been solid, but now is being maximized with a pass happy point guard in Halliburton. Ben Shepard's another late round success story. Buddy Hield is another kind of what I would consider a shrewd addition. Like they make Buddy Hield got traded, excuse me. He was there, and you have these guys that you had for a period of time, and then you make these moves that you see best fit. But when you have those type of players, you can make the moves that help you win when you see fit. So the Jazz have a lot of those type of players that I think are useful, but may not be useful in the actual the moment you're trying to contend. And that's where you have to pick and choose the moments you try to contend. Are there pockets where you can infiltrate and be contenders? Maybe the Pacers have found the perfect time to do so, and maybe they'll make the Eastern Conference Finals, which is serious contention. Okay, now that gets me to my next point. They traded for Siakam, and for the Jazz, if you want to continue this analogy, that could be someone like Mikal Bridges or maybe Brandon Ingram, who in theory could be acquired to complement Markkanen, and you would give up contracts to match and draft picks and assets. And I think the Jazz would be similarly well off to the youthful Pacers, who I would deem ahead of schedule for a rebuild. But I would also posit the question I asked at the intro of this are they all that close to contending? Because to me, Siakam's is pretty athleticism reliant. He's also an aging co-star. He's 31 years old, who costs a lot of money, and they'll need to hope to re-sign him, or they'll really need to hope for Mathurin to develop a ton, or they'll need to re-up in the off seasons to come to complement Halliburton as Siakam either plays for another team or regresses. I think both are likely. Now, how this relates to the Jazz, they have a top 30 player in Lauri Markkanen, the assets to make a trade, and 4 or 5 younger players in similar stages and tiers in terms of NBA success and productivity in their careers. So Keyonte George is a good piece, for example. In a few years, he can be a really strong contributor. Colin Sexton is a 20-point-per-game scorer, and he's done that numerous times. And then you have guys, as the Jazz stand, may not be there in the future, but are currently on the roster, like Jordan Clarkson and John Collins, who are 15 to 17 point per game scorers, who may be traded to acquire someone to fill a timeline of choice, much like Buddy Hield was, or much like you could say Bruce Brown was to acquire Pascal Siakam. Walker Kessler could be a little bit like Obi Toppin in that he had varied levels of success. Early, he was very good his rookie year. Second year was a sophomore slump. But if used right, Kessler could thrive just like Toppin has next to Halliburton. Now, Taylor Hendricks has a two-way potential. That's what's super in vogue and coveted in today's NBA. If he's cultivated properly, molded like the ball of clay the Jazz want to use, and the reason they took him at number 9, he could play a factor going down the road. The Jazz just need 1 or 2 more players to be focal points of their offense, and they've got the complementary pieces, much like the Pacers do. Dunn, if you want to continue this analogy, plays a similar role to TJ McConnell. I think TJ is a little better, but they're both defensively oriented and kind of score when needed and are leaders. I'm not advocating that the Jazz follow the Pacers' path to somewhat contention, but I am providing the thought that the Jazz aren't that far from being adequate, maybe even solid. But I think ultimately the Pacers will need to re-up and find a lot of internal growth in order to actually contend. And then their co-star Siakam will regress. And I think they probably end up in somewhat of a purgatory. So while Ingram and or Bridges intrigue me, as trade options, I think the Pacers will be a team to watch to see if this process works and if it's worth jeopardizing the legitimacy of a rebuild by fast tracking. Excuse me, and um, and if they fast track it, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But the Pacers are a case study that I think the Jazz can be Pacers level if they make a trade for one of Bridges or Ingram. But is it worth it? Is the West so much better than the East that if the Jazz made those same moves, they still wouldn't move the needle that much? That's also possible because I think the East is significantly worse than the West. But it becomes a question of, does that float your boat in terms of the Jazz fans? Are you guys content with what you've seen as contending? Like the Jazz fans seemed content with what the Jazz had in Donovan Rudy, and in theory, playoff success being all things equal, the Jazz. I mean, I think the Jazz with Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell would have slammed the Pacers. Like I'm biased, I fully acknowledge that, but I really think, especially the better versions of the team, 20 and 21, I think the Jazz would have killed this version of the Indiana Pacers. But all things being equal, the Pacers won a first round series. The Jazz only won 2 of those in that tenure with Gobert and Mitchell. They beat the Grizzlies and then lost to the Clippers. And then in other years, the Jazz were able to advance with Donovan leading them past the Thunder in his rookie season. That's really it. Like that's the truth of the matter. Even though the Jazz seemed like they were closer, they only won those couple series, and the Pacers are already there with this one. So the Jazz, in theory, wouldn't be dissatisfied with winning one series, but I do think it's harder in the West than the East. So should the Jazz fans want this? Should they feel like they can skip steps and compete real soon rather than plod along in mediocrity? Mediocrity, like the Jazz could plod along in mediocrity anyway if they don't get a really good star. So maybe it's worthwhile to get someone who's established. But is that what you're really asking to contend for? Like the Jazz seemed frustrated that we didn't get over the hump. And I was frustrated we didn't get over the hump. So why would you want to try that again? Might as well try to get the big star. And I think the best way to do so for the Jazz, as I've outlined in other ones, is to go rebuild through the 2025 NBA draft, hopefully hit in the 2024. Don't win too much in the sense of you want to have that top 8 protected pick the next year and hopefully get Cooper Flagg, get Ace Bailey, one of those guys that we deem as in the draft community as being star level players. I think that's the way to go about it. So I think the Pacers are a little bit of a test study. They're a bit of guinea pigs. Can the Jazz learn from what the Pacers do? I wonder if the Pacers end up a cautionary tale by the end of by the end of their surge, whatever ends up being their timeline, or will they be a success story? But I applaud them for making something happen, and I won't be mad if the Jazz make a trade. But I do think that there's caution that needs to be aired. Well, that'll do it this week. Next week, I think I'll be at the Combine, and I cannot wait to keep you guys covered on all things NBA draft and Combine-related stuff, plus discuss where the Jazz end up in the lottery coming up and say who are the guys to grab. Who are the guys to grab, where the Jazz will be picking, depending where we land. I'll be landing in Chicago the day of the Combine, so hopefully can make it to the Combine. And either way, I'll have you covered, talk you through who the Jazz should pick once the Combine airs. And hopefully, knock on wood, I'm knocking on wood if you can hear that, I don't want the Jazz to not get that pick, the 0.4% chance. Hopefully the Jazz will be picking high, and I'll tell you exactly who the Jazz should pick. One last thing, though. Locked On Sports has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, and available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that are covering every single league. Find Locked On Sports today, now available on the free Fire TV's channel app. Well, thanks again for listening, and I'll be back with you next week. And as always, go Jazz. I'm just as big a fan as you guys are, and I really want us to do well in this process. That's why I'm throwing out these cautionary tales of, is this worthwhile? But part of me just wants to go for it because I want the Jazz to be good just as badly as you guys do. So I'm right there with you. Thank you guys for listening. I'm excited to be back with you from Chicago next week.